Breaking news from Good Ranchers. Over 85% of grass-fed beef in stores is imported. Most grocery store meat contains antibiotics, hormones, and harmful seed oils. Good Ranchers does things differently. All their meat is born and raised on local American farms. No antibiotics, no added hormones, no seed oils. Just one ingredient, meat. Visit goodranchers.com and get $25 off your first order with code RANCH25. That's code RANCH25 for $25 off your first order. Goodranchers.com. American meat delivered.
I'm Dana Carvey.
I'm David Spade.
Fly on the Wall's back for another season, now on audio and video every Monday and Thursday.
So many incredible guests will be joining us.
Follow and listen to Fly on the Wall everywhere you get your podcasts.
Too good to be true.
The year was 1927. That's when the Longfellow Institute was built, up on a hill high enough that the town would not have to hear it, though sound has always been more patient than distance. The trees were felled in winter, their trunks splitting with gunshot cracks that echoed across the frozen river below. By spring, the earth had been dynamited flat and the foundation poured. Concrete sunk deep into soil that had once held roots older than any living memory. Dr. Soren Simon stood at the edge of the excavation with a leather folio tucked beneath his arm, watching men in suspenders and wool caps assemble his monument to salvation. And he felt not pride, exactly, but inevitability. The structure was not merely being built, it was arriving. He had toured the state asylums before drafting his plans. He had walked through wards that smelled of ammonia and neglect, past iron cots bolted to floors, past women bound at the wrist with torn bedsheets because the institution could not afford proper restraints. He had seen a man left in hydrotherapy for so long that his fingers wrinkled and split like boiled fruit. He had watched orderlies harden into something resembling their patients, short-tempered, vacant-eyed, efficient in their cruelties. What disturbed Soren most was not the suffering itself, but the absence of system within it. There was no elegance to the brutality, no design. The Longfellow Institute would correct that. It rose in gray stone and narrow Gothic windows, as though madness would be subdued by reverence alone. The corridors were intentionally wide, the ceilings vaulted to discourage the sense of compression that often triggered agitation. The doors, however, were thick oak reinforced with steel cores, each fitted with observation slats positioned precisely at eye level. Soren believed in sightlines. He believed that if one could see a thing clearly enough, long enough, it would eventually surrender its secrets. The first patients arrived before the West Wing was fully furnished. They came in transport vans with barred windows, wrists cuffed in leather, escorted by sheriffs eager to unburden their counties. Some were little more than frightened girls whose grief had become inconvenient. Others were men who shouted scripture at passing automobiles or claimed to receive telegrams from the dead. A veteran of the Great War screamed whenever the wind shifted, convinced artillery was correcting its aim. A woman from Hartford insisted that insects had nested beneath her skin and clawed at her arms until they bled. There was also a quiet schoolmaster who had attempted to drown himself after becoming convinced that numbers were conspiring against him, that certain equations, when solved, whispered instructions he could not ignore. The staff pretended composure in Soren's presence, but fear fermented quickly in enclosed spaces. Nurses spoke in hushed tones while sterilizing instruments, their glances drifting toward locked doors as if expecting them to bow inward. One orderly resigned after 3 nights, claiming the building carried sound in unnatural ways. Soren dismissed him in his office without irritation. "You are mistaking structure for superstition," he said calmly, fingers steepled. "This building is sound. It is not haunted. It is corrective. That was the word Soren preferred. Cure implied finality, and he was too much of a scientist to promise absolutes. Yet he believed deeply that the mind, like any organ, could be adjusted. Theories from Europe had begun circulating. Experiments with insulin shock, the therapeutic value of induced seizures, surgical intervention in the frontal lobes to disrupt pathological patterns. There was talk of electrical currents capable of resetting cognition, of carefully calibrated trauma that might shock a disordered brain into coherence. The work was controversial, yes, but progress had always required a tolerance for discomfort. Hydrotherapy became routine within weeks. Patients were lowered into porcelain tubs filled with cold water, sheets wrapped tight around their bodies to prevent thrashing. The shock often subdued them into silence, their breath shuddering into compliance. Soren observed from a measured distance, recording pulse rates, duration, responsiveness. In his notes, he avoided emotional language. Convulsions were responses. Screams were data. When insulin shock therapy was introduced, the wards grew quieter afterward. Induced comas produced a peculiar stillness that staff interpreted as improvement. Some patients awoke confused but subdued, their former agitation dulled into something pliable. Others did not awaken at all. These instances were recorded with clinical precision, folded into charts that would later be presented as evidence of innovation. The surgical theater was completed by autumn, white tile gleaming under suspended lamps. The first frontal lobe procedure was performed on a woman who had not spoken for nearly a year. Her muteness deemed pathological stubbornness rather than despair. Soren's hands were steady. The room smelled of antiseptic and anticipation. When it was finished, the woman ceased her nightly screaming. She also ceased nearly everything else. She sat by a window thereafter, blinking at the changing light with a placid indifference, and the staff congratulated one another on the transformation. Soren wrote in his journal that evening, his script meticulous despite the hour. He described the procedure as promising. He noted a reduction in disruptive behavior. He did not describe the way the woman's eyes seemed perpetually mid-thought, as though something had been interrupted and left unresolved. Winter returned with a severity that rattled the Institute's windows. Snow gathered along the buttresses and in the courtyard where patients were occasionally permitted supervised air. The building had developed a low, persistent hum. Likely pipes contracting in the cold, though no engineer could identify its source. At night, certain corridors seemed to breathe. Staff began leaving lamps lit longer than necessary. Even Soren found himself lingering outside his office before extinguishing the light, listening to the layered quiet. And yet, amid the tightening severity of his work, something softer intruded upon his life. His wife, Aliska, had grown pale with pregnancy, her frame delicate beneath wool dresses that no longer fastened comfortably. She disliked the hill and refused to visit the Institute, claiming the wind there felt invasive, as though it pressed against the ribs. Soren dismissed her unease with gentle rationality, though he did not insist she accompany him. At home, he was attentive in a distracted way, his mind often cataloging case notes, even as he rested a hand against her swelling abdomen. One evening in late December, while wind scraped along the eaves like restless fingernails, Aliska gripped his sleeve and whispered through clenched teeth,
"It's time."
The labor was long and threaded with a silence more terrifying than any scream. Soren had cataloged within his wards. Snow thickened outside the bedroom windows, muting the world into white suspension. He found himself acutely aware of his own helplessness, of the uselessness of theory in the presence of blood and breath. When at last the child arrived, slick and furious with life, the cry that tore from a small body seemed to fracture something in the room. Not violently, decisively. Soren held his son with hands accustomed to surgical steel, and for the first time in months he felt awe unconnected to mastery. The child's eyes opened briefly, unfocused yet intent, and Soren experienced a flicker of recognition that startled him with its intensity. They named him Christoph. Outside on the hill above the river, the Longfellow Institute stood dark against the snow, its many windows reflecting nothing. In several locked rooms, patients stirred simultaneously from shallow sleep, their breathing shifting into quiet unison, as though some distant signal had passed between them. And though Soren did not yet know it, the building he had raised to correct the minds of others would one day turn its architecture inward, toward his own blood. Simon says, and the world listens.
It's Toyota Truck Month. Time to get a truck that works as hard as you do. Tacoma, Tundra, built for the worksite, ready for the trail, and packed with tech that makes every drive smarter. Available with 360-degree panoramic cameras for perfect visibility in tight spots. Powered tailgate for easy loading. And a high-tech connected screen to keep you on the grid no matter where you are. All backed by the brand known for its legendary reliability. The rugged Toyota Tacoma and the full-size Tundra are built to handle it all. And right now, your local Toyota dealer has great financing and lease options available to qualified customers, meaning there's no better time to test drive the Toyota truck you need. Find a great Toyota Truck Month deal today when you visit buyatoyota.com. That's buyatoyota.com. Toyota, let's go places.
Breaking news from Good Ranchers. Over 85% of grass-fed beef in stores is imported. Most grocery store meat contains antibiotics, hormones, and harmful seed oils. Good Ranchers does things differently. All their meat is born and raised on local American farms. No antibiotics, no added hormones, no seed oils. Just one ingredient, meat. Visit GoodRanchers.com and get $25 off your first order with code RANCH25. That's code RANCH25 for $25 off your first order. GoodRanchers.com. American meat delivered.
Christoph Simons grew up beneath the shadow of stone. By the time he could walk without stumbling, his father had already begun speaking of corridors and case studies as though they were bedtime stories. Soren did not consider this indoctrination, he considered it inheritance. The Longfellow Institute was not merely a place of employment. It was proof that the human mind could be disciplined into obedience. That chaos could be diagrammed and subdued. He believed with the quiet arrogance of men who built monuments that his son should witness such triumph early. Aliska disagreed with a severity that only sharpened as the boy aged. She had never stepped inside the institute after its completion. On the day Soren first suggested bringing Christoph along, she went pale in a way that had nothing to do with illness. "He is a child," she said, her hands tightening in the fabric of her dress. "Not a specimen." Soren answered gently, though there was a steel beneath it. "He will be a doctor. He must learn not to fear what requires understanding." "It is not fear," she replied. "It is knowing." She refused to elaborate, so Christoph began accompanying his father on Saturdays, small fingers wrapped around Soren's gloved hand as they climbed the long path toward the Institute's iron gates. The building dwarfed him at first. Its windows seemed impossibly high, the stone too vast to belong to something human. But children adapt quickly to scale. Within months, the corridors no longer intimidated him. They fascinated him. He learned the smells before he learned the terminology. Disinfectant, cold iron, damp wool. Beneath it all, something older and harder to identify. A sourness that clung to corners and seemed to deepen in winter. The staff did not know what to make of him. A few offered stiff smiles, others avoiding looking at him entirely, as though proximity to innocence made their duties harder to justify. Patients reacted unpredictably. Some ignored him, some stared. One elderly woman began weeping openly the first time she saw him, repeating in a fragile voice that he was too bright for this place. Soren dismissed such reactions as symptomatic projection. As Christoph grew into boyhood, then into the long-limbed awkwardness of adolescence, the Institute became a second education. His father spoke to him not as one speaks to a child, but as to a colleague in training. He explained hydrotherapy with clinical detachment. He described insulin shock as promising, though imprecise. He even allowed Christoph to observe from the gallery above the surgical theater, instructing him on anatomical structures with the calm cadence of instruction. "You must never mistake emotion for insight," Soren told him once as they stood overlooking a restrained patient being prepared for treatment. "Compassion without discipline is chaos." Christoph nodded because nodding pleased his father, though he was not certain he understood. At home, discipline did not announce itself as severity. It arrived dressed as order. Soren believed deeply that children, like institutions, required structure to prevent decay. Chaos began in indulgence. Weakness began in softness. And so he introduced correction as ritual, ritual as game. One autumn evening, when the light thinned early and wind traced its fingers along the eaves, Christoph lingered at the dinner table long after his plate had cooled. He was 7. His legs no longer swung freely from the chair. They touched the floor now, but only barely. He stared not at his food, but at the darkening window beyond it, where the hills stood faint against the sky. "Eat," Soren said evenly. Christoph did not defy him. He simply hesitated. Eliska sensed the shift before it occurred. She always did. Her shoulders stiffened at the stove. Then Soren smiled, patient, almost playful. "We'll make a game of it. Simon says." Christoph's attention sharpened immediately. He liked rules. Games meant clarity. Games meant winning. "Simon says, sit up straight." The boy straightened. "Simon says, fold your hands." Small fingers interlaced neatly. The tone was light at first, the commands harmless. "Simon says, take a bite." He obeyed. "Simon says, chew." Simon says, swallow. A rhythm developed, clean, predictable. Then it shifted. "Simon says, finish everything on your plate." Christoph's stomach had already signaled fullness, but the rules were the rules. He continued. When his pace slowed, Soren leaned forward slightly, his shadow lengthening across the table. "Simon says, no tears." The moisture gathering in the boy's eyes retreated through force alone. Eliska turned then, her voice careful. "It's only supper, Soren." "Structure is never only anything," Soren replied. Later that night, the game resumed upstairs. Christoph's bed had not met standard. The corners were rounded instead of sharp, the blanket uneven by less than an inch. Soren stood in the doorway. "Simon says, strip the bed." Sheets came loose. "Simon says, start again." The first attempt failed inspection. "Simon says, tighter." The second nearly passed. "Simon says, perfect." By the third, Christoph's hands trembled from repetition, though he did not complain. Eliska stepped into the hall, her voice low and strained. "This is not play, Soren." "No, it's preparation," Soren answered calmly. Finally, Soren knelt beside the bed, smoothing the blanket with deliberate care. "Simon says, lie down." Christoph obeyed. "Simon says, close your eyes." "Simon says, go to sleep." The boy's lashes fluttered but did not settle. Soren leaned closer, voice soft enough to resemble mercy. "Simon says, go to sleep." The words repeated, losing all trace of play. "Simon says, go to sleep. Go to sleep. Go to sleep." Christoph eventually stilled, not because sleep had claimed him, but because resistance had nowhere left to stand. From that night forward, he never confused love with instruction. and he never forgot that control, when wrapped in ritual, felt like safety. At home, Eliska watched her son's posture change. He no longer ran through the yard without looking over his shoulder. He listened more than he spoke. Some nights she found him standing at his bedroom window, gazing toward the hill where the Institute's silhouette cut into the sky. "You do not have to go with him," she told him once, brushing hair from his forehead. Kristoff hesitated before answering. "He says I'm not afraid." She closed her eyes. By 14, Kristoff knew the layout of the Institute well enough to walk its primary corridors alone. Soren permitted this in measured increments, believing independence would cultivate authority. The boy carried himself with a composure that unsettled some of the staff. He did not fidget or shrink from the patient's gazes. If anything, he watched them with quiet concentration, as though studying a language he had not yet been taught to speak. The incident occurred on a gray afternoon in late November, when daylight dissolved early and the building seemed to lean inward on itself. Soren was detained in his office reviewing case files, and Kristoff, too proud to admit discomfort, excused himself to find the laboratory unaccompanied. He had taken the route before, or believed he had. Yet corridors in the Institute possessed a subtle duplicity. Identical arches repeated at careful intervals, and the muted lighting flattened perspective until distance became ambiguous. He turned left when he should have turned right. The hum in the walls was more pronounced that day, a low mechanical resonance that seemed almost rhythmic. Kristoff told himself it was the heating system. He walked faster. The hallway narrowed without his noticing. The windows disappeared. The air grew cooler. Doors lined the walls, heavy oak with reinforced observation slats, each bearing a small metal plate engraved with a number. Most were dark behind the glass. One flickered faintly. Kristoff paused. He could retrace his steps. He knew that, yet something held him in place, a pull not of curiosity, but of recognition. The flickering light steadied. It was not a flicker at all, but movement. Then, with the sound too soft to be accidental, one of the doors opened. It did not swing wide. It eased inward, deliberate as breath. Kristoff did not call for his father. He would later try to remember why. Inside the room, there was no overhead light, only a thin blade of illumination from the corridor cutting across the floor. The walls were bare stone, the cot was untouched. And standing at the center of the room, hands clasped loosely behind his back, as though awaiting introduction, was a man. He was taller than Kristoff expected, broad-shouldered but gaunt, his clothing hanging from him with careless symmetry. His hair was cropped short, his face unshaven but not wild. What unsettled Kristoff most were the man's eyes, which seemed perfectly adjusted to the dark. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then the man smiled, not widely, not theatrically, but with unmistakable familiarity.
"You must be the boy."
Kristoff's throat tightened. He should leave. He knew he should leave. The man took one unhurried step forward, remaining within the shadow.
"My name's Tucker, but you can call me
Breaking news from Good Ranchers. Over 85% of grass-fed beef in stores is imported. Most grocery store meat contains antibiotics, hormones, and harmful seed oils. Good Ranchers does things differently. All their meat is born and raised on local American farms. No antibiotics, no added hormones, no seed oils. Just one ingredient, meat. Visit GoodRanchers.com and get $25 off your first order with code RANCH25. That's code RANCH25 for $25 off your first order. GoodRanchers.com. American meat delivered.
Hi, I'm PJ Vogt, and I want to tell you about my podcast, Search Engine. We try to make sense of the world, one question at a time. No question too big, no question too small. We will even answer your questions if you send them in. Stuff like, what happens when a cemetery goes out of business? What should we do about teens using AI to do their homework? Who buys luggage at the airport luggage store? Follow and listen to Search Engine in partnership with Odyssey, wherever you get your podcasts.
Adolescence did not dilute Kristoff's attachment to the Longfellow Institute. It refined it. Where other young men sought distance from their fathers, Kristoff gravitated toward him with a composure that felt less like obedience and more like convergence. By the time he reached adulthood, he moved through the Institute with a familiarity that rivaled Soren's own. Orderlies deferred to him instinctively. Nurses found themselves confiding in him. Patients, especially the difficult ones, watched him with unnerving attentiveness. It warmed Soren in ways he did not articulate. To witness one's legacy take root so naturally was a rare privilege. Kristoff possessed an ease the staff lacked. He did not flinch when confronted with muttering tirades or sudden guttural shrieks. He would sit for long stretches inside observation rooms, speaking quietly, listening longer. Those labeled violent softened in his presence. Those deemed unreachable responded to him with subtle shifts, a straightened posture, a pause between fragmented sentences, a peculiar awareness. Even the men whispered about as demonic, those whose eyes tracked things no one else could see, whose laughter erupted at inappropriate intervals, regarded Kristoff with something approaching recognition. Eliska watched this transformation with growing alarm. The older Kristoff became, the more he seemed to belong to the hill. He returned home later each evening, carrying the building's scent in his clothes. His gaze drifted mid-conversation. Once she found him standing in the darkened kitchen long after midnight, whispering too softly to distinguish the words. "You are becoming him," she said, her voice trembling with something more fragile than anger. Kristoff regarded her with mild confusion. "I'm becoming myself." She began packing within the week. The confrontation unfolded not in a fury, but in a quiet that felt preordained. Soren stood near the window, hands clasped behind his back, as Eliska informed him she would be leaving. She did not accuse him of cruelty, she accused him of blindness. "That place feeds on him," she said. "It always has." Soren replied with measured restraint. "It is an institution of medicine, not myth." But when she turned to Kristoff, her composure fractured. "Come with me," she pleaded. "You do not belong to that hill." Kristoff's expression did not harden. It emptied. "You are not my mother. My real mother walks below." A guiding shadow. The words did not sound rehearsed. They sounded remembered. Eliska recoiled as though struck. She left the house that night without looking back, and though Soren told himself the dissolution of his marriage was unfortunate but necessary, a fissure had opened somewhere within him that no architecture could reinforce. Years passed in a tightening spiral. Kristoff's presence at the Institute deepened from visitor to fixture. He required no formal title, he simply existed within the ecosystem of the building, and the building seemed to respond. Incidents of agitation decreased in wards he frequented. Patients previously restrained for hours sat calmly when he entered. Staff attributed it to charisma. Soren attributed it to intuition. Yet intuition without structure unsettled him. He began noticing subtleties. Conversations that ceased abruptly when he approached. Patients who smiled faintly at private recollections after Kristoff departed their rooms. And always, somewhere in the periphery, the name Tucker surfaced. The night of the laughter arrived without warning. It was late, well past the hour when even the most restless patients surrendered to sedation. Soren remained in his office reviewing charts, a glass of bourbon warming untouched near his elbow. The building had settled into its usual nocturnal hum, a low vibration threading through pipes and beams. And then the laughter began. It was sharp and unrestrained, rising through the corridor like something cracking open. Not manic, not hysterical. It possessed cadence, intelligence. And it sounded unmistakably like his son. Soren stood at once, the chair scraping too loudly against the floor. The laughter continued, echoing doubling back on itself, then cutting off abruptly. He stepped into the hallway, heart beating with a rhythm he refused to label as fear. The sound had come from the east wing. As he approached, the air seemed colder. A door stood slightly ajar at the corridor's end, light spilling faintly across the stone floor. Soren moved with deliberate control, reminded himself of protocols, of rational explanations. He pushed the door fully open. Kristoff sat cross-legged on the floor of an empty room. There was no cot, no restraints, no second chair. Just his son, illuminated by the corridor's thin light, facing the far corner as though engaged in intimate conversation. "Father," Kristoff said pleasantly, without turning. "You are just in time. I was introducing you." Soren's gaze swept the room. There was no one else present. "Introducing me to whom?" he asked carefully. Kristoff finally looked up, and there was warmth in his expression, even delight. "Oh, why, to Tucker, of course." The name settled into the space between them like dust. Soren stepped farther inside, scanning corners, ceilings, shadows. The room was empty. "There is no one here, son." Kristoff's smile did not falter. "Oh, well, he doesn't much care for being seen by everyone." The hum in the walls intensified, subtle but perceptible. Soren felt it in his teeth. "You were laughing, son," he continued. "Oh, well, Tucker tells such marvelous stories. You would really like him, Father." Soren extended a hand, steady despite the tremor threatening his edges. "Come back to my office, son. We'll talk there." Kristoff rose without resistance, casting one final glance toward the corner before following his father into the corridor. Later, seated across from one another in Soren's office, the atmosphere felt artificially normal. The bourbon was poured, papers lay stacked in reassuring order. The world outside the door remained contained. Soren waited until Kristoff had taken a measured sip before speaking. "Whom were you speaking with earlier, son?" Kristoff regarded the amber liquid thoughtfully before answering. "Oh, well, Tucker, of course." "And where is Tucker now, son?" A faint amusement flickered across his face. "Oh, well, he's always around." Soren's jaw tightened. "And is this Tucker a patient?" Kristoff shook his head slowly. "Oh, well, not exactly." "What does he speak to you about, son?" Kristoff leaned back, eyes bright with fervor that unsettled more than overt instability could have. "Stories. He has all sorts of wonderful stories. So many, in fact, that I've decided to write them all down." Soren felt something cold settle behind his ribs. "You're writing a book, son?" Kristoff nodded, pleased. "Yes, Father. It's called Sleep Tight."
Toyota builds vehicles that don't just keep up, they lead the pack. On the road, in your routine, and most of all, within your budget. Take the Camry and Corolla, two stylish and dependable cars, both with the latest tech and driver-friendly features, and the performance to make every commute feel effortless. Or if you're chasing space, adventure, and versatility, check out Toyota's RAV4 and Grand Highlander, delivering the capability, comfort, and confidence to take you everywhere you need to go. Plus, with hybrid options designed for efficiency, and four-wheel and all-wheel drive models ready for any terrain, your Toyota is more than just a reliable way to get around. It's built for your way of life. And right now, your local Toyota dealer has great financing and lease options available to qualified customers, meaning there's no better time to step into a new Toyota. Start your search for great deals today at buyatoyota.com. Toyota, let's go places.
Life can feel overwhelming, but on my podcast, From the Heart with Rachel Brathen, we're in it together. Every Friday brings you a new story. Listen to From the Heart with Rachel Brathen wherever you get your podcasts.
Sleep had abandoned Kristoff long before it had abandoned his father. By the time winter tightened its grip again around the hill, the Institute had inverted their rhythms entirely. Kristoff drifted through daylight hours in a pale half-consciousness, emerging only after dusk with a peculiar vitality. Orderlies reported seeing him pacing the corridors at 3 a.m, pausing outside of locked rooms, whispering in tones too low to transcribe. Sometimes he laughed, soft at first, then splitting the silence with sharp crescendos that ricocheted off stone and returned distorted. Patients began sleeping more soundly. That, more than anything, unsettled Soren. There was a stillness settling over the wards, but it was not the sedated quiet of treatment. It felt anticipatory, like an audience awaiting instruction. Soren told himself it was exhaustion that drove him to search his son's quarters late one afternoon while Kristoff lay in unnatural slumber. The room was orderly to the point of sterility, the bed undisturbed, the curtains drawn. On the desk sat stacks of paper bound in uneven bundles, pages covered in dense handwriting that seemed to grow more cramped as it progressed. He reached for the nearest stack. Sleep Tight. The title appeared at the top of nearly every page, sometimes centered, sometimes scrawled in the margin, sometimes written so hard the ink tore the paper. There were thousands of pages. Soren began reading. The prose was intricate, obsessive, detailed beyond what any young man should conceive. The stories were not merely violent, they were architectural. Worlds constructed where suffering had symmetry, where pain was ritualized into order. Children described in loving specificity before being tucked into places that had no names. Shadows that detached from walls and learned to move independently. A guiding presence who corrected disorder with exquisite patience. The repetition unsettled him most. The phrase, "go to sleep," appeared again and again, woven into dialogue, carved into imagery, pressed into scenes until it ceased being narrative and became command. He did not hear the door close behind him. Soren turned sharply. Kristoff stood there, fully awake now, eyes bright with something fever yet deliberate. "Oh, sorry, Father. Did I frighten you?" Soren forced composure into his posture, though his pulse hammered at his throat. "Not at all, son. I was just enjoying your work." Kristoff's smile twitched at the corners. "Oh, well, it's not quite finished yet. I'd hate for you to be disappointed in me." The word disappointed lingered. He stepped closer, gaze drifting to the manuscript in Soren's trembling hands. "Say, what was that game we used to play? Simon Says?" The past did not arrive gently. Soren remembered a smaller house, a narrower kitchen, Aliska standing rigid while he enforced order through raised voice and tightened grip. He had believed discipline necessary, structure essential. Simon Says, "Finish your plate, or else." The memory carried the crack of ceramic against tile. Simon Says, "Make your bed, or else." Kristoff at 7, hand shaking as he tucked corners too sharply. Simon Says, "Go to sleep. Go to sleep." Go to sleep. Go to sleep. The repetition had not been playful. It had been command disguised as care. Back in the present, Kristoff tilted his head. You taught me so well, Father. Soren lowered the manuscript carefully to the desk. Kristoff, he said, voice measured, deliberate. I am very proud of you, son. Of your intellect, of your dedication. But this obsession. Kristoff's expression softened in a way that felt almost pitying. Obsession, he repeated gently, as though the word itself were quaint. No, Father, you misunderstand the scale of it. He stepped aside slightly, as if making room for someone else to enter the conversation. You believed you were building a hospital, a sanctuary for the unfixable, a laboratory for correction. But you were chosen long before you ever drew those blueprints, Father. The temperature in the room shifted, subtle but unmistakable. The air felt layered, crowded. Soren's jaw tightened. Chosen by whom, son? Kristoff's gaze lifted toward the ceiling, toward the unseen weight of the building above them. By those who walk below. Guided by shadows. There are forces at work here, Father. Forces that have lived and died, and yet they continue to rise. They require architecture. They require structure. They require belief. Powerful men understand this. Men in offices far grander than yours. Men whose signatures open doors and close investigations. They know what this place is meant to become. Soren felt something cold press inward against his sternum. You're speaking in riddles, son. Makes sense. Kristoff smiled faintly. No, Father. I am speaking plainly. The Longfellow Institute is not for the broken. It is for the initiated. For those who can see beyond the veil of flesh and habit. A home for those who walk below the surface. You laid the foundation, Father. You poured the concrete. You sealed the doors. You called it medicine. But it was always something else. The hum in the walls intensified, no longer ambient but directional, as though responding to his cadence. I am simply finishing what you began. And then Soren saw him, standing just behind his son, partially obscured by shadow, yet undeniably present. It was the man from the hallway years ago, broad-shouldered, composed, watching. His expression was neither cruel nor kind, it was just patient. Who are you? Soren demanded, though the words scraped against his throat. Kristoff's lips curved. Oh, you can see him now. Well, I suppose that means, Father, I'll be taking the reins. He stepped closer to his father, close enough that Soren could see the faint tremor beneath the brightening in his eyes. Don't worry, Father. I'm going to make you proud. I'm going to make everyone so proud. By morning, Dr. Soren Simons was discovered in his office arranged in a configuration that defied both physics and mercy. His limbs were bent in impossible reversals, elbows folding backward as though hinged incorrectly, knees rotated inward until bone pressed visibly against skin at grotesque angles. His spine curved in two opposing directions simultaneously, giving his torso the appearance of being wrung like a wet cloth. His fingers were interlaced behind his back without fracture to the skin, as if threaded through unseen apertures. His face bore no contortion of agony, only a fixed astonishment. The mouth parted delicately, as though interrupted mid-instruction. There was no blood, no sign of struggle, only precision. And the manuscript of Sleep Tight sitting upon the desk. Christoph assumed his father's position with a serenity that disarmed suspicion. Investigations were brief and inconclusive. Certain correspondence from influential offices arrived promptly thereafter, expressing confidence in the Institute's continued leadership. Funding was not withdrawn. In fact, it increased. The Hill remained quiet. On his first evening as Dr. Simons, Christoph sat behind the heavy oak desk that had once anchored his father's authority. The leather chair seemed already accustomed to him. Papers were arranged in careful order. A single lamp cast warm light across polished wood. And then there was a knock. "Enter," Christoph said. Nurse Gertrude stepped inside, posture respectful. "Hello, Dr. Simons. Did you need something?" Christoph regarded her with a measured warmth. "Nurse Gertrude, you have children, correct?" She smiled politely. "I do, Dr. Simons. 2, in fact." His eyes brightened. 2. Well, isn't that marvelous? He reached into the drawer and withdrew a freshly bound copy of a book, its cover embossed in understated gold. "Nurse Gertrude, this is for you and your children." Gertrude accepted it with a small laugh. "A book? Why, thank you, Dr. Simons. The children will be delighted. They love clowns." Christoph leaned back slightly, fingers steepled, gaze drifting momentarily toward the dimmest corner of the office where shadow pooled thickest. "Yes, we all need a little tucking in at night, don't we?"
Round and round the painted track, velvet ribbons at your back, candy breath and paper glow, darling, time to say hello. Tickets in your trembling hand, mother waves the organ band, porcelain hooves begin to rise, tiny mirrors watch your eyes. Welcome to the carousel, children take your seat. Every pretty pony knows your name. Smile for the carousel, aren't the horses sweet? Lean a little closer, play our game. Round and round, you're feeling fine till the music slips the line.
It's Toyota Truck Month. Time to get a truck that works as hard as you do. Tacoma, Tundra. Built for the work site, ready for the trail, and packed with tech that makes every drive smarter. Available with 360-degree panoramic cameras for perfect visibility in tight spots, powered tailgate for easy loading, and a high-tech connected screen to keep you on the grid no matter where you are. All backed by the brand known for its legendary reliability. The rugged Toyota Tacoma and the full-size Tundra are built to handle it all. And right now, your local Toyota dealer has great financing and lease options available to qualified customers, meaning there's no better time to test drive the Toyota truck you need. Find a great Toyota Truck Month deal today when you visit buyatoyota.com. That's buyatoyota.com. Toyota, let's go places.
Breaking news from Good Ranchers. Over 85% of grass-fed beef in stores is imported. Most grocery store meat contains antibiotics, hormones, and harmful seed oils. Good Ranchers does things differently. All their meat is born and raised on local American farms. No antibiotics, no added hormones, no seed oils. Just one ingredient, meat. Visit GoodRanchers.com and get $25 off your first order with code RANCH25. That's code RANCH25 for $25 off your first order. GoodRanchers.com. American meat delivered.
Hi, I'm PJ Vogt, and I want to tell you about my podcast, Search Engine. We try to make sense of the world, one question at a time. No question too big, no question too small. We will even answer your questions if you send them in. Stuff like, what happens when a cemetery goes out of business? What should we do about teens using AI to do their homework? Who buys luggage at the airport luggage store? Follow and listen to Search Engine in partnership with Odyssey, wherever you get your podcasts.